Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. This is another video in my enhancement tree series. In these videos, I pick out an enhancement tree and I go through all the enhancements one by one and let you know what you should take and what you should not take. And I'm not claiming this video is going to be perfect, but I do my best to give you the best advice possible from a min-max perspective. If you want to check out my other enhancement tree videos, I will link them all in the description below. As you can see, today we are doing the dwarf tree. The dwarf tree is very interesting. I think dwarf is a very fun race. It's a very viable race. It's not the best race. I think you can argue it's the best race for a few builds, but overall it's not quite as good as, say, human or blade forge for most builds, but it has some really good attributes. Dwarves get a lot of hit points. It's a very survivable race, and for melees like paladins, especially vanguards, barbarians, fighters, it's a very solid, viable choice. Let's go ahead and start with the cores. The dwarf's cores all give you hit points, and the whole dwarf tree has a theme of hit points. It's a very survivable race. Cores 1, 3, and 5 are all the same. They each give you 10 hit points, and cores 2 and 4 give you additions to your constitution. So if we're talking a level 20 character, if you take all 5 cores, that's going to be an extra 50 hit points. You get +1 constitution from the 2nd and 4th cores, and you get 10 hit points from the 1st, 3rd, and 5th cores. They're solid cores. Of course, hit points is good for any build, obviously. And if you don't have even if you don't have a ton of points to spare in a racial tree, you can at least get some good hit points out of these cores, even if you don't want to go really high into the tree. Let's go to tier 1, and on the left here you can see that the dwarf has a very specific dragon mark line, and the dwarf dragon marks unfortunately are not very good. Unlike humans, the dwarf, they're not worth it. It's going to cost you a feat plus a lot of action points. What you get out of these dragon marks, the first tier just gives you additions to search, which isn't going to be useful unless you're a trapping character. The second core, or the second dragon mark tier, gives you spell resistance. The third tier gives you radiant force field. Neither of these spells are very good, just to be blunt. Spell resistance is vast majority of the time a useless spell. Radiant force field is a nice spell. It gives you a 25% reduction in untyped damage, in all damage except untyped, for a very short period of time. But because the duration of radiant force field is so short, and because your uses are so limited, and you get a 1 minute cooldown, it's really not that useful. Even though the cooldown in the dwarf core is better than from the spell, it's still not that useful. Definitely not worth the feats and the action points. So I would not recommend you investing in the dwarf dragon marks. The second enhancement here is Iron Stomach. Iron Stomach is very interesting because it gives you boost to anytime you drink a potion, it gives you extra effects. For the first tier, it will give you neutralized poison. If you take the second tier, every time you drink a potion of any type, you'll get neutralized poison and remove disease. In the third tier, anytime you drink a potion, you'll get neutralized poison, remove disease, and heroism. Unfortunately, this is a useless enhancement because all of these effects are readily available from cheap potions. It's sort of convenient to get something like heroism anytime you drink a potion at lower levels, but the other effects like remove disease and neutralize poison are readily available through any potion vendor throughout the game. It's just not useful. There's plenty of other ways to get these effects, and while heroism is sort of convenient to get, it's gonna be outclassed by greater heroism as soon as you have a greater heroism clicky available or the spell. So I would not recommend you investing in that enhancement. Stout. Now Stout adds a little bit to your skills, to your balance, and saves against poison. Obviously, this is not that great. It's definitely not worth the reaction points. Balance and poison balance is not very important, and poison saves are not very important. Now, balance is a skill that a lot of players like to invest in, but I can tell you from experience, I've invested full ranks in balance on melee characters, and I've built other melee characters where I don't invest in balance at all, and I can't even tell the difference, quite frankly, between the ones where I invested balance in and I didn't. If you're not aware of what balance does, a little extra skill in into balance helps you get up faster if you are tripped. Let's move on to one of the defining features of the dwarf tree, which is their dwarven weapon training line, which adds 2 hit and damage for either axes if you choose this left-hand option, or hammers if you choose the right-hand option. This is very similar to the weapon damage enhancements in the half-orc tree, except that the dwarf ones are more limiting in that you can only apply these effects to axes or hammers. Half-orc lets you use any two-handed weapon. Now, dwarf does let you use some one-handed weapons that a half-orc doesn't, but it's a little bit more limiting if you're going for two-handed fighting. And just like the half-orc tree, this line is not very good. It's too expensive to be worth it. It's much too expensive to be worth it. Another problem is this damage that it adds. It's not a percentage. It's just a flat +1 or +2 depending on your tier, and it doesn't scale into epics. It's just much too expensive AP wise to be worth investing in, so I would not recommend you invest in this. Really, the only reason to invest in this is if you are going for throw your weight around, which I'll talk about when we get to the 5th tier. It's unfortunate. I think the developers need to get back to these racial trees at some point and make these worth investing in, because right now it's just too expensive. I think it's a total of 2, 4, something like, I think it's 2 points per rank. Yeah, it's about 8 action points or so to get the full line, and it's just way too expensive considering you're only getting a minute amount of damage out of it. Okay, let's go on to Dwarven Armor Mastery. This is a fairly decent enhancement. If you're wearing heavy armor, it's nice. The AC isn't too important, but the +3 to your maximum dexterity allows you to get a little bit of extra dodge if you have an appropriate dodge item equipped. Because that addition to your maximum dexterity bonus lets you get it raises your dodge cap a little bit. Let's move on to tier 2. And the first one here is Dwarven Tactics, which is actually very nice. It's one of the better enhancements in this tree, especially for a build that, obviously it's only going to be for builds that use tactics, like say a Vanguard or a Monk that's going to use Stunning Fist. But for 3 action points, getting +3 to your DCs is very nice, and if you are investing in tactics on your character, on your Dwarven character, you will absolutely want to take this. We get on to Child of the Mountain. This is a so-so enhancement. What it does is, if you invested in all 3 tiers, it adds 4% to your maximum hit points and +3 fortitude saves, but here's the kicker, it reduces your reflex saves by 3. And because it reduces your reflex saves by 3, and because it's so expensive, it's actually 2 action points per rank for a total of 6 action points at tier 3. It's only so-so enhancement. The reflex save hurts a lot because reflex saves are probably the most important save in the game. Most damage spells have a reflex save, so it's not a save that you want to be ignoring. And it's definitely more important than your fortitude save. In the 4% HP, it's fairly marginal. Even if you have 1,000 hit points, that's only an extra 40. Because 4% of 1,000 is 40. I think you're better off not taking this unless you have such a high reflex save that you can afford to take that hit. Also, the more base hit points you have, the more benefit you get out of that 4% maximum health. So if you're something like a barbarian, that has a lot of hit points, you'll get more benefit out of that 4% maximum health than a class with lesser hit points, because the higher your base hit points, the more 4% is to you. 4% of 1,000 is 40, whereas 4% of 500 is only 20. So I would not recommend this, unfortunately. The -3 to reflex saves and the expensive cost just makes it not worth it, in my opinion. Move on to Dwarven Shield Mastery. Unfortunately, this one is also is too expensive to be worth it. It also costs 2 points per rank. What it does is at tier 3, if you have all 3 tiers, it adds plus 15% to your shield armor class and plus 3 to your tower shield maximum dexterity bonus. The AC looks nice. 15% you think would be a significant amount. However, the kicker is it only adds this to your shield armor class. And since even the top shields in the game are only going to have around plus 20 to your AC, that means this 15% is adding at best around 3 AC. So it's not worth taking even for a tank. And I have no idea why this costs so many action points. It wouldn't even be worth taking if it was only 3 action points. Let's move on to tier 3. Dwarven Runes. This is a very, very nice enhancement for dwarves. It adds plus 3 to your saves against spells. That's wonderful. 3 action points for plus 3 to your saves. Great deal. Definitely take that one if you're going to be investing this high in the dwarf tree. Stand Like Stone. This is a really bad enhancement. And unless you're going for Dwarf Fortress up here, it's not worth it at all. What it does is it's an action boost. For 20 seconds, you'll gain plus 30 to your balance, your PRR, and you'll also gain plus 30 to energy resistance for every single element. However, it comes with a 50% penalty to movement speed. You also sink in water and can't benefit from the fly spell. The stacking PRR and energy resistance is really nice, but what makes this enhancement really bad is the tiny duration. I don't know why it's only 20 seconds. That's way too short. And I see a lot of this in enhancement trees. The tiny durations often make a lot of these really cool abilities useless. If this lasted for a few minutes, it would be pretty useful. But for 20 seconds, it's just not good. And because it gives you a minus 50% to your movement speed, it's not even useful for running through traps. Plus, this enhancement requires equal ranks of Child of the Mountain before you can even take, which we already went over and decided was not that good either. So definitely avoid this. Alright, let's move on to Tier 4. Tier 4, this is the top of the Dragon Mark line. So this requires that you have the Dragon Mark and that you take all the previous Dragon Mark enhancements to get to. And this is an SLA, which is really cool. It's a Earth Grab SLA for dwarves. And it's not bad. Still don't think it's very good, even for a high Constitution build that's going to get a good DC for it. A couple reasons for this. One, it only affects one enemy, and the cooldown is unnecessarily long at 30 seconds. If this SLA had a cooldown of 15 seconds, it would be a lot more useful. And 30 seconds, we're talking about a crowd control enhancement here, a crowd control spell with double the cooldown of Stunning Blow. It's just not that practical. It's fun to play around with, and especially if you're not going for min-maxing on your character, it's really fun to have, especially if you're a barbarian or something who's going to have a very large constitution, who's going to have a good DC for it. It's just not viable. Also, as we already covered, this enhancement requires you to spend a feat for the Dragon Mark and also action points in the previous Dragon Mark enhancements, which we already went over, that they aren't very good. you're a lot better off, instead of spending a feat on a dragon mark to get this ability, you're a lot better off spending that feat on an actual tactic like improved trip or stunning blow or stunning fist if you're a monk. Those are all much better crowd control abilities that cost you a feat, but they don't cost you any action points. So why would you invest in getting Hands of Stone when you can just spend the feat on a better crowd control ability that doesn't even cost you AP to boot? So probably not something you want to go for unless you're not min-maxing and you just want to play around with it. Okay, Dwarf Fortress. I know I've said a lot of bad things about these enhancements, but Dwarf Fortress, this one's actually pretty good. What it does is it adds plus 7% to your weapon damage, which, unlike the weapon damage line, does scale into epics because it's a percentage. And you also gain plus 3 to your armor class and intimidate, and also will saving throws against fear. That doesn't really matter. The armor class intimidates, okay, that's okay. The will saving throws versus fear doesn't matter at all, since you're going to have greater heroism at some point, and your saves against fear don't matter because greater heroism gives you fear immunity. But the plus 7% is the really important thing here, and it's very nice. Problem is, it's at the very top of the tree, and it requires you to spend points in Dwarf Fortress. It requires you to spend points in Stand Like Stone and Child of the Mountain, which we already went over and decided were not very good. Because you have to spend 6 points in Child of the Mountain and another 9 points in Stand Like Stone, or another 3 points in Stand Like Stone, and also another 3 to get the full ranks in this one enhancement for 7% extra damage ends up costing you a total of 12 action points. So in the end, the cost is too high, and I don't think it's worth it because of that. Now, it's not terrible. You can argue taking this. It's not going to make your character gimp or anything by taking this. But in my opinion, and someone else might disagree, I think that the action point cost is too high for this enhancement. Especially considering you can play a race like Human, where for only 1 action point you can get Human Damage Boost, which is a plus 20% boost to damage. Granted, that's only an action boost, and it only lasts 20 seconds per use, and you only get 5 base uses. Still, considering this costs 12 times as much, I can't say it's near as good as Human Damage Boost. But it's very player dependent. Say you're a player who just absolutely hates clicking action boosts, something like Human Damage Boost. This enhancement is going to be a lot more attractive to you because that plus 7% does not rely on you clicking a button, and it also lasts the whole quest. So in a longer quest, you're going to benefit more from Dwarf Fortress than, say, an action boost, because in a longer quest you might run dry on your action boost, whereas this Dwarf Fortress enhancement will always give you plus 7%. So in longer quests, this enhancement does gain some value. Longer quests without many shrines, I mean. Okay, let's move on to the last enhancement, which is the other defining enhancement in the dwarf tree, Throw Your Weight Around. This is really cool. It lets you use your Constitution modifier to determine the damage you deal with either axes or hammers. However, the problem with this is that the cost is extremely high. You have to use first of all, you have to invest in this weapon damage line to even get to it. And since it's tier 5, and all tier 5 enhancements require 15 action points, you have to spend at least 16 action points to get this. So even if you only want this enhancement, you're going to end up burning 16 action points. And I think for most builds, you're better off just investing in strength instead and saving these 16 action points. However, I do think that there is one build that can get very good use out of this, and it's absolutely worth it, and that's Occult Slayer Barbarians. The reason is Occult Slayer Barbarians want a very high Constitution score anyway, since the Occult Slayer Capstone adds your Constitution score to their spell resistance number. So for an Occult Slayer Barbarian, this essentially lets them focus only on Constitution, and also lets them get a lot of extra hit points along the way by only investing in Constitution. Also, for an Occult Slayer, a pure Occult Slayer, they're going to be pure, so they're probably going to have some action points that they can afford to spend in other trees, unlike a deep multi-class character that's going to be picking low-hanging fruit off of many enhancement trees. Keep in mind you have to invest some strength to meet certain feat requirements like power attack. And the real problem with this enhancement used to be that you would need I think it was 23 strength to qualify for overwhelming critical, but that has since been changed to where you do not need that. So this enhancement is a lot better than it used to be, because now for overwhelming critical, that's an epic feat that adds +1 to your critical damage multiplier. You only need an improved critical, slash, or bludgeon to qualify for it, whereas you used to need 23 strength. So overall, the dwarf tree, it's fun. It's a very fun tree. Stuff like the Earth Grab SLA, the con to damage through throw your weight around, and the heavy support for hit points in general can make some very survivable builds, some very big tanky builds. However, other than con-based Occult Slayer Barbarians, I don't think there are too many builds who are better off going Dwarf over Human or Blade Forged. Human offers cheap healing amp, a free feat, and really cheap damage boosts that is really tough for any race or dwarves to compete with. And if you're a class that doesn't get healing inherently, Blade Forged is probably a better choice than Dwarf, just because you can get the Reconstruct SLA, which is just amazing. However, dwarves are fun. I've played several dwarves to cap, and it's fun being a little different, having a shorter character, having a huge beard. DDO is not only about min-maxing, and I don't want people to think that from me creating these videos that I'm advocating only min-maxing, because in the end DDO is about fun, and dwarves are fun. And if you want to choose a race that's different, dwarf is a good choice, because unlike other races that are just awful, like say elf, dwarves are very viable and they're very competitive. I don't think they're optimal. I don't think they're better than Human or Blade Forge, but they're very competitive and they're very viable. So especially, like I said, for fighters, for paladins and barbarians, and also vanguards and any sword and board tank type build. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe and tell your DDO friends and guildies about my channel. Thanks for watching.